Welcome back to FinTalk, brought to you by VERMEG. Here we discuss pressing topics in fintech, regtech, covering regulatory, collateral and digital across banking and insurance and finance. VERMEG has been proud to deliver innovative software solutions in the industry with stability and cost efficiency for a global roster of clients. With over 20 years of trusted transformation in finance and insurance, we're bringing industry's top expertise to FinTalk. I'm Gerald Akhtar and I'll be your host for this podcast. So welcome back to FinTalk, brought to you by VERMEG. So today's session we're going to be talking about open source and everything to do with open source. I'm delighted to have with me Jane Gavronsky from FINOS as CTO and also Malcolm Arnold from VERMEG as the Global Head of Reg Product. Before I let them introduce themselves, I just kind of want to talk about open source just slightly. Today's topic really is going to be what we know about it, what it is in its entirety, what benefits of it from the user. We're hearing a lot about it from the industry, what benefits it will give to the general user from a client or a firm perspective, and also what does it do for regtechs. So Jane and Malcolm, over to you guys. It'd be great to know actually what you do, your firms, what they do, and really what is open source.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jane Gavronsky. It's great to be here. Thank you, Jawad, for inviting me. I am with FINOS. FINOS is the FinTech Open Source Foundation, and I am CTO at FINOS. Our mission at FINOS is to advance the use of open source technologies within the financial services industry. My background is in financial services technology, in fact, in capital markets. I've spent my entire career delivering technology internally at financial institutions, anywhere from trading to reference data, etc. It's very interesting for me to be now involved in open source very explicitly because, sharing technologies in financial services was like sharing any trade secrets in financial services, extremely taboo. And now we're seeing that turn, and I'm very excited to be at the pivotal point of that culture turning.
And hi, everyone. Malcolm Arnold. Delighted to be here. Thank you, Jawad. I'm head of regulatory product for VERMEG. VERMEG is a software provider. Within that, there's the RegTech business unit, which I'm proud to lead from a product standpoint. We sell regulatory reporting software into various regions of the world: North America, UK, Europe, and APAC. The sort of regulatory reporting that we do is the prudential, statistical, and risk-based regulatory reporting. These are often daily, weekly, monthly reports, as opposed to the transaction reporting. And so in my role, I have a responsibility for the whole solution, the whole product line.
Yeah, thank you, guys. And I know I've got Jane from New York and Malcolm in London, so it feels like a global feel here. Guys, just want to start from the very beginning, really. Open source. We hear a lot about it. What actually is it? So it'd be great to get a take from a software, both software vendors, both sides of the pond, really. What is it for can we tell our users?
Yeah, so to start at the beginning, sorry, Jane, jump in. Open source software just really, at a very basic level, means that the source code is available to be read and, in theory, also contributed to. So a lot of companies, for good or bad, and organizations like to put open as a prefix before almost any noun these days. And what they're really getting at is that there's an ethos, or ought to be an ethos, of collaboration and community spirit, where the thing you're working on and all the discussions and debates that were behind it are all in the public. And that's really what the open prefix has begun to mean. But I think that open source is the first and definitive use of that open prefix. So yeah, it's mostly about a licensing and distribution model from my point of view. It means that as software vendor, you can go in and grab these software libraries for free, which is a fantastic benefit. But also it gives you freedom in that you can make edits and changes and modifications to suit your purposes. And some of the open source licenses will compel you to donate those changes back to the maintainer, which is a kind of a fair bargain. Some of them are very permissive indeed and allow you to just make your own modifications in secret. But basically it just means that the source code is available. You can see how it works and you can contribute back. And that's the distinction really between open and closed source. But Jane probably has a more thorough an academic.
No, you got it. And you saved me reading off the book definition, but you're absolutely right. I think there is the cultural component and then there's the licensing component. So purely from a licensing perspective, as you said, the code is written and given under a license of free to use by anyone without any commercial implications. There are, as you say, more permissive and less permissive licenses as to when someone uses the code, are they obligated to donate back the changes that they're making or not? And the most permissive, you can just take a copy, as you said, and update it privately without having to give back your updates. Yeah, so I think that opens up opportunities for people to develop technology without having to pay for some of the core components, which I think then drives into the cultural component, which is it creates a more inclusive, a more even playing field for people to interact with each other on a technology platform. This, of course, started within the technology organizations and technology community and has now, the libraries that are available for different business verticals, right? So FINOS, for example, is the financial services vertical. There are all kinds of industries that are leveraging this. The Linux Foundation, which we are a part of, does provide projects and hosts projects for many such industries. It's in hardware, it's in telecommunications, it's in networking, it's in Hollywood, even libraries and projects that have to do with, video processing and rendering. Those rely on open source code at the core. And obviously, as I said, it's very new for financial services. So besides code, besides open source, this now also refers to open standards as well. So standards which are developed in the open and benefit from the contribution of many players that would want the standard to exist. And that is something that we at FINOS are also heavily involved in.
Thank you, guys. I know it's new for the financial industry, as you said, Jane, and it's been available everywhere else at the moment. Here in the UK, especially around the reg space, there's a lot of discussion around controls, data lineage, governance, all those kind of elements around that. So how can open source facilitate that, or make it easier, or does it make it easier? Is the question really.
I can try to kick it off without talking too long because I have so much to say. We'll probably be here for 3 sessions. So again, I think first of all, you need to start with the culture, and open source kind of invites everybody to the table, and the open standards do as well, and allows people to start talking to each other about, well, how do we do this, right? And what's the right implementation that would work for everyone? And again, throughout my career, everything is always very siloed in financial services. Even within an institution, you would have the equity guys and the fixed income guys. You would have the front office guys and the back office guys and the compliance guys. And everybody has their technology silos. And whether it's internally changing the culture first, and even more so externally, where people realize, oh, I can talk to my peers at other banks about this. And no, it is not giving away the secret sauce. That's something that is huge, and it's going to be an evolution. So first of all, it's cultural. Second of all, very simply, very, very simply, and there are many other reasons, it just saves money. Because everybody's doing the same thing. And if everyone participates and shares in delivering something, well, you save a ton of money and time, frankly. So time is money. So it all comes down to money in the end. And then, of course, it kind of creates a much more even ecosystem, because if you're all using the same thing, it's much easier to process the data, generate the data, have more information about what's going on in the market. And I'll stop.
Yeah, that's perfect alignment with what I was thinking as well, Jane. So the cultural thing is the most important thing, because if you look at reg tech, what sets reg tech apart from other sorts of fintech in the general sort of family of techs is that it does feel like it has a different ethos. There is a bit more of a community-minded approach. although the various players and vendors in the RegTech space are kind of fierce competitors, there is more of a collaborative attitude there in RegTech, and it's a distinctive thing about RegTech as opposed to other fintechs. At a cultural level, it's very aligned with the ideas behind open source, which is obviously a lot more collaborative and community-minded. In particular, I think this is really, it's not driven by anything other than the brutal fact that most of the regulatory requirements that financial institutions have to adhere to, it's really just a burden and a cost for them. It's not an area of much competition. It's all financial institutions, their peers have got the same regulatory requirements. So it's just, you could say you can compete in who can do it the cheapest, but really it's an area that's ripe for collaboration. And as Jane was saying, that the cost of open source and the cost savings by sharing are there to be had by the whole industry and to be passed on, therefore, to consumers of the industry. So if you take the sort of regulatory reporting that VERMEG do or support with our solutions, regulators could open source things like data models and open source things like the calculations, and therefore those could be shared as libraries and components. There's still a space for vendors to compete, but if they're shared, then the benefits of sharing are for everyone, and therefore they all stand to benefit a lot.
So in terms of collaboration and everyone working together, who does it? Who kicks it off? Is it the regulator that has to really kick off the initiative and everyone gets on board? Is it the Bank of England, transforming data collection? Is it them doing it, or is it vendors, or is it who does it? Because it's
Yeah, I think you've got to ask yourself the question: if it's such a good idea, why hasn't it happened before? And I do think that regulators have to kick it off. The Bank of England's transforming data collection, they've now booted off a quite a community-oriented collaboration through almost less like a social networking app with partnership with EY, which looks very interesting, and we're bound to get involved with that sort of thing. So they've got the collaborative feedback coming in. But I do think the supervisors have to kick it off. They need to look at the sorts of governance models that Linux Foundation has, as Jane mentioned, and also Apache Foundation, Eclipse, and these other sort of big open source communities, and see how they're able to get basically people who are antagonists in some ways. You look at the likes of Oracle and Microsoft and Red Hat, they're fierce competitors, and yet they do collaborate in those cases where it matters and where it's not a zero-sum game for them to compete. So I think that a lot of those governance ideas should be taken wholesale by regulators to allow them to sort of convene, and maybe sponsor it and push it along. But the participants in the process would have to be the financial institutions and the software vendors like us.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. So, classically, there are many times when industries come together to collaborate on a standard. So recently I was learning more about credit card payments, right? And if you think back when credit cards started, you had point-to-point transactions that had to be cleared between different banks. So of course the banks got together and said, well, hey, from bank A to bank B, I have one interface. And from bank A to bank C, I have a different interface. That doesn't make any sense, right? So when you have this kind of like a wheel and spoke model where everybody needs to talk to everybody, of course, the industry will come together and create something that's convenient. The same thing happened with the fixed standard. If you have a model where, each participant needs to kind of talk to the regulator and they don't have to talk among each other, then maybe they're not going to see necessarily the return in driving the standard themselves. So in this case, I would agree with Malcolm. Yes, absolutely. It would make sense for the regulator to come out and say, well, hey, we want this to be the standard, because then it helps everybody. Everybody knows how to converse with them. It definitely would help. But we're seeing this as well. The regulators are trying to understand, okay, why should we have a standard, right? And I think those are the questions in the Bank of England's sort of release that they did. The first question is, how do we benefit from a standard? Who benefits from a standard? And to me, if I look at those questions, I don't know, I probably wouldn't even think about answering that, because to me it's so obvious. You know, of course you would. It's like the nuts and the bolts. You know, if you don't have a standard for the nuts and the bolts, you know, you're not creating an ecosystem, an economically viable ecosystem. So yes, it would be good, but I think the regulators are also in a position where they want to learn from the industry. And that's where the industry coming together and showing an example of where they're collaborating sort of drives the leader towards accepting.
It makes sense, right? It makes sense to collaborate. I feel like we're going to be far away from it. You know, telling clients that we could save them money, that should be a massive jump to collaborate between firms. Just kind of a few marks to close out. Jane, have you seen any collaborations or any examples of where this has worked in kind of your experience?
Yeah, so first of all, we have been working on a strategic initiative for some time at FINOS. It's called the Open RegTech Initiative, where we do bring together industry players and invite the regulators to come in. And in fact, it's recently gotten very lively because FINRA has been coming and showing us what they're doing. And they recently went public with a tool that they have called FIRST, which is the beginnings of something that allows people to more easily and more in an electronic fashion to traverse their rule book and understand which rules are applicable for certain use cases. So they've come to us and used our community to advertise what they're doing. And recently, once they released the product, they essentially kind of asked everyone for feedback. And that feedback request is also out there public. I think people should take a look and comment on that as well. And that's creating essentially a rule taxonomy. And that's great. We also have a project that was started by some of our members that attempts to do the same thing. The rule books are huge and the jurisdictions to which they apply are many. So working together on different parts of creating a taxonomy would be awesome. So we have some of those projects already started. Then we have some more pointed projects like liquidity coverage ratio implementations that are being done also in the open. So we see several in different areas. And also, I mentioned standards before. Last but not least, and we'll be releasing more information about that in December at our conference, FINOS is going to be hosting the common domain model that's coming over from ISDA, and we'll also have participation from ISLA and ICMA as the standard model for developing financial instrument standard models and for describing transaction and business activity information. So yeah, we have many, and it's a great time to get involved.
Thank you, Jane. Sounds like a lot to look forward to, and hopefully the conference as well goes well for you guys. Malcolm, any points from you? What clients could expect to do or see? I know what we're looking to do in the future as well.
Well, yes, it does feel like there's a lot of this collaboration happening at the grassroots, and it feels like the stage is set for a bit of a revolution over the next 5 years or so. I know it's been slow paced, and maybe some of the listeners are thinking, where are the fruits of this and why hasn't it happened before? But it does feel like there's a sort of a growing momentum here, of the things that Jane mentioned. From a VERMEG point of view, also your listeners might be thinking, well, why would this guy from VERMEG be pushing open source? Doesn't that ruin the whole business model of selling software? But we're faced with the same sort of thing as banks, really. We're confident that the parts that will be open source will be the bits where vendors don't really compete. There'll be, kind of the boring library-like parts of an overall regulatory solution. And there ought to be, and there will be, ways where we can compete, and vendors like us compete to offer value-added features to make a really good solution out of it. So it's the sort of thing where a core part of a reg tech solution might be open source, but there'll be enough there proprietary for the vendor to add compelling features to make it something that you can sell. I think there's room there for entire, what they call reference implementations, where you'd have almost like an end-to-end open source software solution for a particular regulatory requirement, whether that's a calculation or a wholesale set of calculations and a whole data model and everything. But they won't be much more than reference implementations. That still gives us an ability to compete because we can create a functionally equivalent implementation that is better in some ways. So that's kind of the VERMEG point of view. We want to collaborate as much as possible because we see that it's unstoppable. And we're still confident in our own ability to find value-added solutions, to find compelling solutions in the marketplace.
They say rising tides lift all boats, right? So that's kind of it's an easy analogy to imagine, but it's not just that. It's also you grow the ecosystem, you grow the ability for others to enter the market and have a play in it. So yes, absolutely reference implementations and also open core, right? And open standards. Because once you have that, you essentially create an opportunity for other people to offer solutions more easily. I mean, Linux is a great example of that, as well as Kubernetes, for example, right? So once it was open source, it just created a whole new ecosystem of smaller and larger companies who can A, support the open standard, but B, build on top of it extensions and tools that they can sell. The same thing can happen here. We've seen it many times. So there's very much a commercial end to open source, which is extremely viable.
Yeah, it sets up the foundations. It sets up the game, the marketplace in a lot of ways. That's going back to what we were talking about earlier. In some ways, I think all the regulator has to do is set it up and set up build the playing field, and the players will come and play. They just have to set up the conditions and almost like stand back and let it happen.
Sounds like Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
Build it.